Stay tuned for Butler on Business, coming up next on the Liberty Express.
All right, welcome back to the final segment of today's edition of Butler on Business. My name is Alan Butler. My young Padawan is Jason.
You were almost laughing so hard you couldn't get that out, Al.
Yeah. Okay, listen, we touched on this a week or so ago, and I wanted to tie it into something else, but FDR the Food Destroyer. Tell them what these central planners did to the food, particularly down here in the South during the Great Depression when our people were starving.
All right, picture it, Alan. We're in the thick of the Great Depression, the worst economic disaster of our young nation's history. We have people literally starving, and the savior, FDR, President Roosevelt, secured the passage of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which levied a new tax on agricultural processors and used that revenue, that money that the government took in from the private sector, from the economy, to supervise the wholesale destruction of valuable crops and valuable livestock. Literally millions of pigs were slaughtered, food and crops were destroyed in the name of propping prices up and keeping prices higher.
All right, so let me get this straight. Middle of the Great Depression, soup lines, food kitchens, and he implements a tax on agricultural processors and then uses that money to go out and destroy food.
Yep, the tax went to overseeing federal agents now. They would go out and literally destroy acres upon acres of perfectly good fields of cotton, wheat, corn. They would plow under these fields, destroy the crops. Healthy cattle, sheep, pigs were absolutely slaughtered and then buried in mass graves. Nobody got to eat any of that food because they wanted to keep prices higher. That's the name of the game in the Keynesian economic model. Price deflation's a bad thing. They wanted to artificially keep prices higher, so we had people literally starving at the expense of this policy.
And his picture hangs in our schoolrooms as the great savior. I'm telling you now, I know that the older generation, the greatest generation, most of them still love FDR. I think he was an admirable guy. He overcame some personal hardships, but he belongs right up there with Woodrow Wilson, right up there with LBJ.
Well, all those names that you just mentioned, and I would throw President George Bush in there because he did it as well, they all grossly expanded the size and scope of government. They all expanded the notion that government should be involved in areas of people's economic lives and in their civil lives and their social lives. But
well, back to destroying the food. Tell me more about that.
Well, the fact that really stands out in my mind that really highlights this whole issue is the fact that the Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace at that time, personally gave the order to slaughter 6 million baby pigs. Before they grew to full size, before anybody could eat them, they slaughtered 6 million pigs and buried them. Now, the other thing that's very interesting is during this time under FDR, this was the first time in our nation's history where the government actually paid farmers not to produce, the first time they paid them for not working at all.
Oh, that's when that got started?
Subsidies, right.
Okay, when the nation was starving, that was FDR's response, pay people not to grow food and kill pigs?
Exactly, and it helped special interest groups. It helped these very specific groups of people at the expense of everybody else by curtailing the supply, by really cutting back the supply, causing prices to rise. So they were able to sell their goods for higher than they could have done so otherwise, but it really hurt millions of people in the economy who had to pay those higher prices or do without food at all.
Well, what about PETA? Where were they? I mean, you'd think they'd be running there, diving in front of the pigs. You ever looked at a pig in the eyes, Jason?
I can't say that I have.
Man, I'll tell you what, that is an intelligent animal. If you ever look at a pig in the eye, you might not ever eat bacon again. But I tell you, that's so outrageous what you're telling me about FDR that it makes me want to go hang my own picture of FDR up. I think there should be pictures of FDR in every classroom. There's practically a picture of FDR in every school. Where did this whole concept of him being this great savior that saved the America, where did all that crap get started?
Yeah, well, it comes from the intelligentsia. It comes from academia. If you look at what their core philosophy it is that we need a strong centralized institution to help promote things like the economic good, or we need a strong central institution to provide for the social welfare or tell us how to live our lives because, heaven forbid, we don't know how to live our lives on our own. And that really fits the narrative. If you look at the presidents who had really expanded the size and scope of government intervention, those are the ones that are touted as the best presidents in the history books. The presidents that were involved with wars and the presidents that expanded the size of government intervention in our lives for doing things like LBJ's War on Poverty or the FDR New Deal. These are very specific instances where the size and scope of government expanded, and that's why they're promoted in our history books as being the best presidents.
Why don't you tell them how they had to abuse the mules because they were not schooled in destroying crops but growing them?
Well, the livestock, or not the livestock, the animals such as the mules that were trained very specifically to walk in between the rows of the crops had to be.
So they wouldn't trample on the food.
Right. They actually had to be retrained, and many of the mules actually refused to walk on the crops because they had spent their whole lives plowing a field normally to produce goods, not destroy them. So the line that I like from Lawrence Reed, the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, is that back in the 1930s, the mules were much smarter than the politicians.
Well, a lot of people are pointing to the fact that we are going to have this massive food shortage. And, agriculture is turning into one of the sweet spots. We have an agricultural boom going on in this country. And in the Farm Belt, things are actually really good. Now, agriculture isn't an easy business, and there are plenty of risk, but there's always going to be a demand for food. And I suspect that the margins are going to stay high at least for some time to come. There's still plenty of potential farmland around the world, but it's a difficult business model. Now, I'm not recommending that people go out and raise commodity-type foods like wheat or soy or corn. I mean, these are high-volume industrial-sized foods. I don't think you can compete with these mega corporations that are doing it now, but niche products would do well. I'd suggest upmarket specialty products like exotic fruits and vegetables. That may be a good area for people to get into if they're looking to do something in this area of agriculture.
Yeah, I completely agree, Alan. I think that niche food, that is an interesting market and a relatively untapped market. Things like even animal-based products, you can do some interesting things with meats and milks and cheeses, and that could be a good business for somebody who's so inclined.
Jason, we've run out of time. I'd like to close with 1 out of every 7 mortgages is currently delinquent or in foreclosure. This is Alan Butler, Butler on Business, and we'll be back tomorrow morning. Thank you for listening.